Cool. Bismillah. We're back again with Keyvan Yahyaí. We're going to do the final part to the Ex-Bahais series. Okay, Keyvan, how are you?
Yes. Thank you, Wade. How are you? I'm fine.
Doing well.
Okay, let's get into this. Actually, Wade, apparently you and I have been referred to as two weird guys. One sitting in Australia is speaking with a Los Angeles accent. The other one sitting in Germany is speaking with a Mid-Atlantic accent. That's a bit of contradiction. Actually suggested by the Baha'i friends, or as they call themselves, Ahibba.
Ahibba, the lovers. They call them Ahibba, means the lovers, but they translate it as friends. Actually, friends in Arabic, to be precise, would have been istiqa. But when you say Ahibba, Ahibba means lovers.
Means lovers, yes. Lovers of Baha'u'llah.
Lovers of Baha'u'llah, yeah.
Okay, let's start your discussion. In the 1964 United States presidential election, Lyndon B. Johnson aired a famous Daisy advertisement. One of the most, which is referred to as one of the most successful propaganda pieces in the annals of the television history. The advertisement opens with a little girl, as far as I recall, picking and counting, the petals of a daisy, right? But when she reaches 10, a metallic voice, takes over, counting back from 10 to 0, as in a missile countdown shooting, Upon reaching 0, the bright flash of a nuclear explosion fills the screen, and candidate Johnson addresses the American people and says, there are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die. Okay, the question is, we tend to associate this very slogan, let's make love, not war, with the late 1960s countercultures. But even it was accepted wisdom among the hard-nosed politicians like Lyndon B. Johnson. So I'm kind of baffled nowadays to see that the Baha'is, the ex-Baha'is, actually try to forge and claim the slogan, as one of their own. Why? Because we know that they've been alienated by, the impersonal forces of other religions, right? Fearing for their own fate, So it is quite normal that they seek reassurance and meaning in the bosom of this slogan, okay? But they're kind of forging. First, can you tell me about the quintessence of ex-Bahaism, ex-Bahaism, because I'm very curious about their existence. We know that a major movement, a religious movement, revolved around the question of identity or immigration. Tell me about them a little bit, about the philosophy that they are relying on.
Well, this is a very interesting conversation. Yeah, this is an extremely interesting conversation. And there are several different layers to this conversation. I've touched on some of it in the last podcast we did on this question. The ex-Baha'i identity is a question, as I have said, it is a managed identity online. And fundamentally, where it is coming from is the attempt by these white liberal Americans associated with this Unitarian Universalist organization to insert themselves in a process where the Baha'i organization is fracturing there's a lot of ideological dissidence. Rather than allow these people to naturally traverse the trajectory of this disillusionment, to come out of this other side, to fulfill the dialectic, if you would. They're basically entrapping these people, as it were, into, first of all, a gate-kept oppositional ideology about the Baha'i faith, while simultaneously being a promoter of the status quo that is the Baha'i organization. Most of these people, for example, like Dale Husband, Eric Stetson, who are the self-appointed leaders of this thing, and even people like Hamid Farnok, and some of the people that he has around himself in Iran, these people fundamentally share a very similar vision of the bigger picture, beginning with their anti-Babism, right? So, for example, they deprecate the Bab, they deprecate the religion of the Bayan, they deprecate Subh Azal, in keeping with the narrative of the mainstream narrative of Baha'ism, right? But they will criticize the administrative, realities, the things that Shoghi Effendi did, etc. But they will not venture into any structural or even, phenomenological criticisms of Baha'u'llah himself. Dale Husband, and also before him, Eric Stetson, let the cat out of the bag several times when they started to get very uncomfortable and very, how shall one put it, aggravated at people who would jump in and do both historical and textual criticisms of Baha'ism from, beginning with its founder itself, with Baha'u'llah himself. They get very uncomfortable with that. So where, for example, Eric Stetson took all of this, and I had warned some of these people back in Palestine and also in Europe, he took it, Eric Stetson attempted to direct the ex-Bahai crowd into becoming a sort of neo-Unitarian Baha'i movement. That is, to elevate the family, the dissident family of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, the family of Mirza Muhammad Ali and Badiullah, etc. This, for a very short period of time, had a few people who were interested in it. But the fact of the matter is that Eric Stetson didn't have any access to texts. Like, for example, some of the writings of Mirza Muhammad Ali, for example, Will of Testament, some of the writings of Badiullah in Farsi, where, he exposes Abdul Baha and the goings on in their family. Stetson didn't have any access to this yet.
Could he have made anything out of them had he had access to them?
He didn't. Well, I offered very early on, when we put up bionic.com in late 2004, in 2005, I offered to translate some of this stuff for Stetson, but he wasn't interested, right? Eric Stetson, basically, like I said, he's a Trojan horse. This guy basically came in, and I believe he was a Trojan horse that was very deliberately inserted into the scene for a very specific person to basically gatekeep opposition to Haifa and to Baha'ism as a whole. To, number one, try to neuter any potential influence and popularity for the Orthodox Baha'is, the Rimiyite groups, and also to then counter me and the people that were congregating around me and the kind of opposition that we were providing to the entire system as a whole, right? The system finds the Bayanis and this entire Bayani narrative to be one of the most dangerous of them all. And they should be afraid, because we're not interested in any compromise. We're not interested in reforming the Baha'i religion at all. We don't consider Baha'ism to be a religion. We consider it a cult. We look at the issue as an existential war where we are determined to eventually triumph over this cult, one way or another. These people have had a free ride for almost 100 years now. They have had a free ride especially since the arrival of the British during the beginning of the Mandate for Palestine. As of next year will be exactly 100 years since the official beginning of the British Mandate for Palestine. They have had a free ride since that period. And we are determined one way or to another, during this coming century, to break this idol once and for all. The Baha'is internally are hemorrhaging. the reason why they have to create all these various gatekeepers in order to stop this tide. And in order to stop us is precisely for that very reason. If they weren't hemorrhaging, if they weren't losing members, if they weren't losing influence, they wouldn't have to do these things, right?
Right.
But that's it. But the whole ex-Baha'i identity is manufactured, maintained, and gatekept for a very specific reason, and that is to keep the real opposition at bay. The real opposition being us, the Bayani community.
Right.
That is what ex-Baha'i identity is all about.
Like in the beginning, it seemed that, the ex-Baha'is usually were outperforming the Baha'is because, the ex-Baha'is were better at data processing.
Sure.
The ex-Baha'is, basically diffused the power, to process information, actually, and make decisions among people, many people, institutions, whereas the Baha'i missionary concentrates information and power in one place, and it was inefficient, to concentrate too much information and power in one place. But at the end of the day,
I don't look at it that way, and I tell you why I don't look at it this way. The outperformance was a very ornamental thing because most of these ex-Baha'i people, and especially during that Eric Stetson period, had direct connections to people who are connected to the system in Haifa. Like, for example, like I mentioned, that the ex-Baha'i identity is an outgrowth out of the liberal Baha'is. The liberal Baha'is themselves are constantly cooperating with the system. Like, one example, very notable example, is Sen McGlynn. Sen McGlynn was officially kicked out of the Baha'i organization in 1997. I was actually there when he read the letter at his house in The Hague, in the Netherlands at the time. And but since that period, when they have kicked him out of Baha'ism, he has gone out of his way to become basically a bulwark for the system, a toady for the system, in every conceivable Baha'i list there is, right? Probably as a way, this is his way, his Toba or whatever it is, and his, I guess his genuflection towards the system to eventually let him back in. I mean, it's over 20 years now that they kicked him out.
so you believe this is part of the reason that they made far worse decision than the Baha'i missionary, and why they lagged far behind the data processing of the Baha'i missionary in Haifa.
Like I said, I don't see a difference between these two. I think they are working for the same people. See, managed opposition, right, in a situation, and dictatorships are always very good at this. Managing your opposition is, the sure way that you can maintain your own authority in perpetuity, right? And this is what has happened with the liberal Baha'i crowd and ex-Baha'i crowd. They are a managed opposition. They're not a real opposition. They don't pose a real threat to the system. Dale Husband has proven this in his own case in his conversations with us.
Oh, yes.
Eric Stetson proved this to me, 15 years ago. The liberal Baha'is are just, part of the system overtly, whatever they say. They may have, very ornamental differences, manicured differences with the system, but fundamentally they're part of that system. And the system allows that. Occasionally the system will come heavy, try to show these people who's still boss, but ultimately these people will always, they will always line behind the system, no matter what it is. And the system here is the UHJ system. If if it was the Remeites, if there was more of a level playing field, right? You would think that some of these people, these ex-Baha'i crowds, would have more of an amenable relationship to the various Remeite groups. Now, I happen to think that most of these Remeite groups are pretty kooky. They're weird, but nevertheless, they identify themselves as Baha'is, and they are just as alienated from the hyphen system as these ex-Baha'is are. But these ex-Baha'is hate their guts. They don't want to have anything to do with the Remeites, and for reasons that are completely different to mine. I mean, my whole shtick with the Remiite group stems from a very fundamental argument that I have about their legitimacy, in that most of these guardians were not Iranians until quite recently. So none of their, these self-professed guardians could actually operate in that status of being a mubayyin, an interpreter, an expositor of the writings, because they had no access to the Baha'i writings in the original Persian and Arabic. Right?
Oh yes, that's
But
right.
people,
Yes.
but this is neither here nor there for the likes of, for example, Eric Stetson or Dale Husband or what have you, because they can't read any of this stuff either. So then one has to ask the question, then, their fundamental problem with the Remiites is what exactly? And, the way that they articulated, it appears to be like a structural issue that they have with the Remiites. But, once you scratch the surface, that the problem is something else entirely. It's not a structural problem at all.
So, are you suggesting that although we can't predict what will be, the motivation, and powers of this sect, but it will be very likely that they will copy, the Haifan Baha'is machinery, those gearing themselves up to refight, the battles of the 1920s,
Yeah, true.
So they might be cut off their guard by an attack from, universal laws of justice, and I believe I said furthermore, because they've claimed time and again they've been discriminated against. But I said when discrimination is directed against a group, a group, I believe should organize and protest against their collective discrimination, But no, their protest is far from an organized protest,
It's not. It's. Let's kind of step back here. The ex-Baha'i reality, especially on the internet and in groups like Reddit and on Facebook, is basically the system allowing certain individuals to blow off a little bit of steam without any more than that. Okay? And they can say whatever they want. But these people don't pose, they're not a real opposition. They first of all, they're the only alternative that they're offering, right, is part of, it's like another segment of the system itself. It's like the two-party duopoly that you have in the United States between Democrats and Republicans. They're both part of the system. They're just, one side or the other. And Unitarian Universalism is very much a white American bourgeois, middle class, cake and eat it type of organization. This is why it hasn't really gone anywhere beyond the shores of North America. I don't think they even have chapters in Canada, but they may. It's a very Americanist thing, this Unitarian Universalist. So in a sense, this task of, kind of containing the opposition appears to have been delegated to these people, to these Unitarian Universalist ex-Baha'is, by this organization. And this goes back to what I mentioned in the last part of this series of what the late Cal Rollins told me. This was this African-American gentleman. He lived in California. He'd been a Baha'i for over 30, 40 years. And he told me that in the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, he had been deputized on behalf of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States to be the go-between for the NSA of the United States and the Unitarian Universalist organization. And my flags went right up. And he told me this at the time when Eric Stetson was, really going for broke, trying to carve a movement, create a cult of personality for himself amongst these ex-Baha'is, and trying to really, the effort to neuter the opposition, the real opposition against the entire Baha'i system was through one of its modalities was Eric Stetson, right? And so, the bottom line is that the ex-Baha'i scene, from Eric Stetson to the ex-Baha'i scene on Reddit, which is represented now in de facto fashion as the successor of Eric Stetson through Dale Husband, is a Trojan horse. This is not a real opposition. This is basically the system allowing certain people to blow off steam without any further ado. And that's all it is.
Oh yes.
And here's the evidence. Here's the clear evidence for this. In 2017 and 18, when I first went on the Reddit Ex-Bahai list, it didn't take very long before you had this extremely unstable, crazy Baha'i fundamentalist who's always online, just David Ben Owen, suddenly shows up. He had been spamming that list for a while. But when I showed up there, this guy went for broke. And he's a very nasty piece of shit, this David Ben Owen, very typical of these Baha'i trolls. The so-called moderator of this place, this guy Saman Wilson, which is not his real name, but it is someone definitely within that camp of Hamid Farnok in Iran. He did nothing, and once I complained about the presence of this David Ben Owen and his trolling, I was blocked from the list, rather than David Ben Owen. David Ben Owen kept going on this list for almost another year before he was finally blocked from that list altogether. And this is very strange. Most people who look at a situation like this, kind of sit back when you look at it. But I'm very familiar with these tactics. And when they happen, it's always easy to read who is doing what for whom, right? And then, with Dale Husband, this whole explosion that happened with Dale Husband was pushing a line that was being pushed very vigorously also by Eric Stetson. And this is a very anti-Iranian and Islamophobic, very anti-Eastern, very pro-American liberal, very white, very Anglo-Saxon Protestant WASP. And, I took issue with him. And this guy's a real ignoramus. He's not very well read. I took issue with it, and this is where the spark ignited. And then they started, really vigorously pushing anti-Bobby talking points and narratives. And at that point, this was all out war on my end.
They were all intrigued, they were kind of, trapped. And, inside, the net of universalists, which is, in my opinion, a branch or an extension of evangelical cult.
Absolutely. Because when most Americans, white middle-class Americans, use this universalist moniker, they don't mean universalist at all. They want a universalization of American values. So it's basically a kind of imperialism, American imperialism, with a softer face. But it's still imperialism, cultural and otherwise, right? It is not pluralism by any stretch of the imagination. This is why I find organizations such as the Unitarian Universalists, whatever they espouse, to be actually Trojan horses. These are not organizations that are, despite all the smiley faces they put on, despite all the platitudes they cause, fundamentally these people represent one of the many faces of American imperialism on a cultural front. So, if we are engaged in a larger global cultural war, a Kulturkampf, against the corrosive influence of Americanism, which is, a very sophisticated form of totalitarian ideology, the American liberalism, then when organizations like the Unitarian Universalists are jumping in to try to grab people who are falling from the Baha'i organization, right? It's very obvious that this is part of a larger strategy of perception management by American imperialism, right? To stop certain people going into certain directions. Now, the Bayani community, because of what we represent, obviously we are a threat to all of this, to this status quo ante, right? And, in their stupidity, people like Dale Husband and others have, basically openly articulated this and said as much. But what I find very strange here is that why people such as Hamid Farnok and this outfit that he's running out of Tehran, this Baha'i Pajuri, and these individuals that are around him, why is the establishment in Iran, for all of its purported claims of being this, that, and the other thing, they haven't clued into the fact that actually these people are batting for the Baha'is. right? That this is that this is actually a weak link in this entire greater critique that is supposedly happening against Baha'ism. Bahai Pashtuhi and Hamid Farnak represent the weak link. They're actually batting for the other team. Whatever faces that they put, whatever articles they publish. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that Hamid Farnak was actually a secret Baha'i.
Yes, a crypto Baha'i. Because this game may be peppered, with various type of failed states, but it knows only one paradigm, for a successful state, In the past, speaking of, psychological point of view, in the past, we've seen, many people dwindling, in the doorsteps, They were kind of hesitant. They were kind of skeptic, someone like Leila Chaman Kha. But they drifted swiftly, apart, to the other party. And I say, as far as psychology is concerned, I say this fight also, makes people far more interested in one another, Never, like, let me give you an example, a bright example. Never had the US been more closely in touch, with Russia than during the Cold War, When every cough in a Moscow, corridor, I say, sent people, scrambling up and down Washington staircases, People care far more about their enemies than they're about their, trade partners, So I believe, for instance, for every ex-Baha'i, thinking about, the Baha'is, there are probably been, 50 times, 40 times, 50 times, 60 times, more sympathetic to them, than the rest of the world. I believe, they share many more, political, and religious, values and grounds. So definitely there is a way to compromise, I can see them in the near future, sitting together, dining together, and maybe even conspiring together. Maybe it's far
They
too
have.
soon.
This is all. I mean, I believe this has already happened, and it's probably happening. So it's a present, continuous. Yeah. I mean, look.
Retrospectively, did you see them kind of, gathered around to conspire against the bionic community?
Yes.
Speaking of this,
I have very little doubt. I have very little doubt that in the early 2000s, when Bionic.com first went up, that people, for example, such as Steve Marshall, were very much part of that effort of hacking that site on a weekly basis until we changed servers and secured it, etc. So, and then the presence of all these so-called ex-Baha'is and liberal Baha'is on sites like Iranian.com, where they were always backing the Baha'i fundamentalists, these Iranians, right? These pro-Zionist, anti-Iranian, Iranian Baha'is. So they are conspiring with each other. This has happened, and there's a huge, massive amount of evidence to that end. Like I mentioned, Sen McGlynn. Sen McGlynn is technically not an official Baha'i. He has been kicked out of the Baha'i organization. Yet since 1997 to this very moment, Sen McGlynn has gone out of his way to be a bulwark and a bulldog for the system in Haifa on every conceivable occasion. Look,
and Hamid Farnak, he
also
holds the same dreary conformity to the Baha'ism, right?
Yeah. Well, you know what it is? They're both. It's an interesting phenomenon because there's an element of Stockholm syndrome with a lot of these people, right? So they're both repelled and also fascinated by this, right? I am neither. I am repelled, but I am not remotely fascinated by Baha'ism because I see right through it. I see what a farce it is, what a fraud it is. I know for a fact that Baha'u'llah Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri was not a real thing, that he was not a great man, that he's basically a product of hype.
They're arguing that, for instance, the Baha'is, or Universal House of Justice has hegemony. But I'm saying that the Caliph sitting in Baghdad, like Abu Bakr Baghdadi, he also claimed universal hegemony, and so many people recognize them as, their supreme leader,
Yeah.
That's so funny. So it's a very, very stupid analogy to make, so when you see these people, from the beginning up to the end,
I think personally, these people are very lost spiritually, extremely lost people.
I'm very confused.
Very confused. But by the same token, this makes them extremely dangerous for a very simple reason, because they're easily it's very easy to make these people come to a point of view. They're suggestible,
As they say, $1 to rule them all. $1, it takes only $1 to rule them all. Can you tell me more about this journal, Bahai Pajou, Bahai research?
What I have seen.
Because you've been approached. Sorry, you've been approached.
Yeah, I was approached twice, actually 3 times by them, to contribute, and I said absolutely not. And my issue was very simple. See, these people from the very beginning of their magazine have devoted these special issues to people, certain individuals. Not one of them are Iranians.
Johan Cole, their husband, Eric Stetson, or people like that, yeah.
Well, you can make an argument for Johan Cole. You can make an argument for Dennis McEwen. But Eric Stetson and Dale Husband are nobodies. First of all, they're Johnny-come-latelys. And second of all, what have they contributed? Eric Stetson contributed a single foreword to a book that was authored by other people but popularly this book is claimed to be authored by Eric Stetson. It was not authored by Eric Stetson, right? The Lost History of the Baha'i Faith, or a collection, an anthology of writings by many of the family members of Baha'u'llah. They were not authored by Eric Stetson. Eric Stetson wrote a foreword and introduction. That's it. So if you want to call him the editor of the book,
written by Negar Baha'i.
Yeah. So if he didn't even edit the book. The book was actually edited, I think, by Brent Matthew, this very shady individual who has kind of gone through a revolving door between the various Remiite groups, and then joined Eric Stetson in his Unitarian Universalist endeavor, and on and on it goes. But yeah. Bahai Pajouhi and the focus of Mr. Hamid Farnaq has been exclusively on these white Anglo-American or Anglo-American ex-Baha'is. Like I said, you can make an argument for Dennis McEwen because Dennis McEwen was a great scholar. He contributed very valuable scholarship to the study of Babism in the Western Anglosphere.
So did Johan Cole?
Well, that's there's a big question mark on this because much of Johan Cole's so-called critical Baha'i scholarship, there's a lot of question marks over some of the things that he's written. I don't like, for example, his Modernity in the Millennium is an apologia, it's a propaganda piece trying to make Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri into some kind of a enlightenment philosopher, of liberal democracy from Iran. Just complete nonsense. Anyone who reads, like, for example, either the Kitab al-Aqdas or even the earlier stuff like the Kitab al-Badi and some of his tablets, later on, Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri was a dyed-in-the-wool authoritarian. He didn't believe in any form of democracy or human freedom. Then there is his writing on, this one particular article that he published with this volume edited by Moshe Sharon, that is purportedly about the Azali Baha'i split of 1867-68. Johan Cole only exclusively utilized Baha'i sources, making it appear that this is a historiographical piece, is a piece of propaganda, completely tendentious, extremely one-sided, and very biased.
Because I believe, the legacy of Baha'u'llah or Universal House of Justice has hugely been venerated through, the veins of these ex-Baha'is.
Yes, it has. And that's what this is why it's obvious to me that these people are a gate-kept opposition. They're not real, right? Because, there are other dissidents and schismatic groups that are not included within the structure of this ex-Baha'i identity, and namely the Rimiites. Okay? Now, what is very interesting from a point of view of kind of a social psychology or a sociology of Baha'i schismatics online over the last couple of decades is the manner in which Stetson attempted to appropriate the Unitarian Baha'is, the family of Baha'u'llah, into this whole thing. Now, what was the UHJ thinking? I think what they were thinking, particularly at the moment when Negar Bahai Anselm was interviewed by Nama Pirates for that documentary, Baha'is in My Backyard, they panicked. That system panicked for a very simple reason, because, just based on my own parents' reaction at the time, this massive outpouring of sympathy all of a sudden to see these people who had been demonized for so many decades. And, you have these Iranian Baha'is who themselves are alienated from the system and then leave, like my parents did, suddenly have this, this sense of identification with people like Negar Bahai Anselm, wanting to know more about these people, even meet these people in person, empathy. This became quite prevalent. It wasn't just my parents, because I was looking around all kinds of places, and there was genuine interest that suddenly came over the family of Baha'u'llah and the Universal House of Justice, and these gangsters of the hyphen system panicked at that point. And that is the point in which then Mr. Eric Stetson suddenly switched or escalated the ex-Baha'i identity into the Unitarian Baha'i scene on the internet. With these, but without having any access to actually original writings or the ability to translate any of this stuff, none of that. In fact, we were the first people who actually put some of these writings online publicly on bionic.com.
I know. But, Vahid, I've seen so far, a milder form of, a kind of milder form of bigotry among the ex-Baha'is,
Oh, yeah.
believing that my religion is unique, that it certainly deserves my allegiance and that I have special obligations towards, my co-religionist inspires me to care about others, and make sacrifice on their behalf, But it is a dangerous mistake to imagine that, because they said without an organization, we would all be living, in hell. But actually, more likely, we would be living, in a liberal paradise, without, the existence or the presence of any Baha'i machinery around.
Look, there's a saying in the United States, which is a great saying. They say that God reveals truth and the devil organizes it. And Baha'ism is, every iteration of Baha'ism is testimony to this. Now, from my point of view, the devil here is Baha'u'llah himself. But look, there is no Bayani organization. There hasn't been a Bayani organization. Granted, the Bayani numbers are dwindling, right? But the fact that there is no organization means that there is, that issues of faith are very individual, right? And, people like Stetson or others like him, kind of beat their chest about being libertarians or Democrats or liberals or whatnot. The example of the Bayani community in Taqiyya is a far more potent and real example of having a religion without an organization. That works.
So you believe the problem starts when, this benign elitism morphs into chauvinistic, white supremacy?
Well, it's also a form of ego, and it's also I think, testimony that, look, people have to behave in the way that they behave, as these Baha'is behave, is because deep down they are not sure about their own, about their own talking points. right?
So
They themselves, let me finish this. They themselves have not bought into their own hype completely. Deep down, they know that this is all bullshit. But in order to reassure themselves and reassure the crowd around them, which is something that the Baha'is do, there's a lot of virtue signaling in almost everything that these people do. They behave in this sort of way. That they're constantly trying to show off, that they're trying to constantly prove to themselves and those around them that they are the best, that they are part of the best group, that this is the best. Nothing is better than ours. We have it all. Our understanding is the most complete. Although these people absolutely, as you and I know very well, understand nothing. They're fools.
Despite they condemn any violence, yet the link between their beliefs, the tenets of their teachings and violence hardly curbed violence, For instance, take Leila Chamancho and the way she double-crossed us.
Yeah.
Can you touch on that a little bit?
Well, we've talked about this. We were supposed to co-author a encyclopedia entry on the Bayan and on Sopa Azal. She even agreed that she would cooperate. I wrote the entry. The minute she read the entry, at first she liked it. Then 2 minutes later, she decided she didn't want me part of it, even though she wanted to keep the entry that I wrote. Then, when you tried to hold her to our original agreement, she suddenly ran off and told the encyclopedia editors that that we didn't want to write the article anymore, and without even informing us that this was the case. When we went back to these people, they said, well, it's too late now. Your main contact has said that they don't want to do the article anymore. So that's it. And then when you and I confronted her about this, she lied, even though we had the evidence from the editors of the encyclopedia, etc. And at that point, it became very evident to me that this woman was actually batting for the Baha'is. She was not interested. I mean, to some extent, I already knew this, and I already knew this from the manner in which she was constantly attacking my friend, Sayyid Miqdad Nawawi, and his scholarship, which, as far as I'm concerned, is unassailable. And also, Leila Chamankla is connected to a complete, ivory tower imbecile in the form of Hassan Ansari, who's at Princeton. Ansari is one of the most biased people on this particular question in the whole of academia, and I got into it with this guy over the question of Furuqi and the fact that Furuqi is a Bayani, and I have evidence of this because I have seen this man's will and testament. It was shown to me in Iran in 2003. Where he, in the beginning of this will and testament, and it is written with a Bismillah formula that is neither Bismillah Rahman Rahim and is neither Bismillah al-Amna al-Aqdas. He's using two different names of God. Where Furuqi basically mentions Nuqtiva Mirat, the point in the mirror, in his will and testament. Well, that obviously makes him a Bayani. Now, Miqdad apparently has also found some more evidence, corroborating evidence about the Bayani affiliation of Furuqi. And this was Bayani affiliation that was there throughout his life, even during the period that he was active with the Freemasons, and all the way until his final stint as the prime minister of Iran before he died. All of this is known. But people like Hassan Ansari, who are these, Hassan Ansari, let me talk about this guy for a minute. Hassan Ansari is the guy that succeeded Ayatollah Hossein Modarresi at this Princeton University. Hossein Modarresi,
Shia and Survival,
and a couple of other very good books. Modarresi was a Hosavi, right? And his character is the character that Roy Motahedeh wrote about in the book The Mantle of the Prophet. So this Ali Hashemi character of the book, The Mantle of the Prophet, is actually Hossein Modarresi. Now, how did Hossein Modarresi end up at Princeton University with an entire seat and department at his disposal? Through the facility of Roy Motahedeh and the Baha'is. Roy Motahedeh is the son of Mildred Motahedeh, one of the most eminent Baha'is in the United States of her time, a confidant of Ruhiya Khanum, as well as Shoghi Effendi. So an Ayatollah from Qom, who was not a Khomeiniist, right? Suddenly is befriended by Baha'is and then comes to the United States and owes his entire career to the Baha'is. Hassan Ansari is the successor to Hossein Modarisi, right? So this anti-Azali line that is now becoming, spoken and is becoming very prevalent within the ivory tower in the Anglo-American world, particularly, not so much in Europe, because you still have one or two good scholars working in this area who are quite, level-headed and are not being drawn into any political games. I mean, particularly one I'm thinking of is Margaret Warburg. She's actually quite good. And she actually did a lecture not too long after I did my lecture at SOAS about Sopa Azab specifically. In the following year, in 2012, she did a lecture about Sopa Azab. So this is a very level-headed woman, but in England, in the United States, in Canada, because of where these Baha'is have put their own people, because there's so much Baha'i money and influence, whether in the university structures or within the publishing element of all of this, they are controlling it. They're controlling the whole thing. And so people like Hassan Ansari, in order to survive in this kind of environment, this dog-eat-dog, shark-infested environment, are beating the drum for the Baha'is, as is Leila Chamanko.
Let's do a really quick fact-checking there together, because you also studied law, you were a lawyer. How could you evaluate and assess, this claim of hers, in terms of law? Because when she was confronted over, her deeds, her lies, she opened up, to one of her mutual friends, saying that because Vahid Azal and Keyvan Yahyaí, are massively frowned upon, and deemed, as the agents of Islamic Republic, getting in connection, staying in touch with them will be leading to horrendous conflicts on an unprecedented scale, and therefore, it left me no room, except drifting away, towards welfare and, a prosperous life. How would you say to that?
Look, I am convinced that Leila Chamanko is under mind-boggling pressure, she's under mind-boggling pressure because she's in the dog-eat-dog corporate environment of the American university system. I believe this woman is mentally unwell, and the pressure has gotten to her finally, right? She is desperately trying to create a career and excel and succeed. I hope she does, but she's doing it by sacrificing people on the way. You and I were two of those. Sajjad Rezvi, her advisor at Exeter, is another one of those. I mean, like I mentioned the last time, all she did throughout the last 2 years of her time at Exeter under Sajjad Rezvi was to backbite him. To me. Okay? That's the way she is. And this is the way these people are. We're about something else. We're not interested in what these people have to say. I will give this woman her due. I think the 2 books that she wrote in Farsi about the Baha'is are very good, especially her dissertation about the relationship of the Baha'is with the Pahlavi regime. I think this is a very important book. It's an important piece of scholarship, and I would definitely cite this book in any future thing that I write myself.
Now, of course, she was trying to distance
but she's trying to distance herself from her own scholarship that she conducted in Iran, and this in itself is very telling, and it basically tells you that this woman has no intellectual integrity. So,
right.
I would, with Leila Chamanko, I would just leave it there. I'm not angry with her. I look at her as a victim of a system. There are many people like her, even Hassan Ansari. But with Hassan Ansari, there's a lot of blame because Hassan Ansari's reviews of the books of Sayyid Mehrdad Nabavi Razavi are not real reviews. They're all below the belt. And he engages in a very sophisticated form of gaslighting of Mehrdad, not too different from the kind of nonsense that Turaj Amini wrote against Mehrdad Nabavi. So there's a lot of blame in the kind of bullshit that Hassan Ansari writes. And Hassan Ansari is an incredibly dishonest person, intellectually dishonest to the core. I am not impressed with his writing. Now, some people say that the bulk of the publications of his sidekick, this Sabine Schmidtke, who's a German, are actually all the hard yards and hard work have been done, or at least recently, all the hard work and hard yards, the writing has come from Hassan Ansari. He's also apparently done this with Reza Pourjawadi, where Reza Pourjawadi was writing and producing a lot of the scholarship that was later published under the name of Sabine Schmidtke. These are rumors, I tend to believe them. I think there's truth to them. But these are the facts. So if this is the case, then Hassan Ansari's attitude towards Sayyid Miqdad al-Nawawi and his writings, and he is very conspicuous anti-Azali, anti-Bayani track, means that he has been bought, and that he's basically pushing the agenda of other people under the guise of scholarship. But Leila Kemenka is a nobody, right now. She has one English language publication, major publication, that dissertation of hers, which is not really good. One or two articles, and that's it. She's trying to survive in the system and build a career for herself. More power to her.
Yes, that's true. Okay, one more question. Last question before kicking the session into touch. Okay. You told me that you met with the late Musa Amanat, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I just want to talk about Abbas Amanat, because Abbas Amanat also appeared on the cover of this Bahai Pajui journal once. His standing, on the Baha'i community is not quite obvious. What's your take on how would you make of his behavior, his behavior?
Abbas Amanat, first of all, Abbas Amanat is a politician, okay? If people want to understand Abbas Amanat's bad scholarship, I would refer them to Dennis McEwen's review of Resurrection and Renewal. Abbas Amanat wrote a great dissertation at Oxford, the early years of the Babi movement. But once it came into the publication form as Resurrection and Renewal, the standard went down, just sunk. I invite anyone to sit and read the dissertation and the book together, especially the first edition of Resurrection and Renewal, and to do this for themselves. Abbas Amanat, as I said, I believe lost his bearings and his own intellectual and moral compass when he had his divorce with his wife, with his first wife. And then once they lost the family rock in the form of Musa Amanat, he went off the rails. So he is also someone that can be easily bought, because the stuff that Abbas Amanat is producing now, and especially that co-authored introduction with Feridun Bahman from Tehran to Akka, is someone who has no intellectual integrity at all. You there? Keyvan.